Welcome to episode 5 of 7 Wrangling. This week is going to be continuing the theme from last episode, which was really just looking at little bits and pieces of the assembly process so far. Some bubble flares, we'll be doing those in some odd places, fitting the fuel tank and looking at just a couple of things I did slightly differently there. Fitting the tail shaft, a close look at the ergonomics, more with elbow room and reach to gear lever, things like that, and a few other bits and pieces. Hope you enjoy. One of the items on the punch list is getting some bubble flares on the end of all of the items in the fuel system. So Mazda has these little clips that go over there in their special fuel lines. I don't really have the other part of their fuel line, so I'm going to have to try and put some bubble flares in the end here. I've looked around at all sorts of things that look to be available. The internet, little tools that you can poke down the inside. But I had wondered whether the tool that I use for putting nutserts in would work okay. And then I thought, well, what about if I just stuck a bolt down the end and put a different type of flaring tool on there, whether I could compress the end enough to be able to just get a little bit of a bubble on there so that when I put the fuel hose on there and the clamp, I've got a means of securing the fuel line. There's 60 pounds of pressure in there, which is a reasonable amount so it doesn't blow off, because at the moment there's just nothing on there. So I did a bit of a test, firstly, on some copper pipe, and it worked really, really well. So super happy with that. And now I thought, well, I'll test it on an old fuel filter that I've got, and it worked. So now is the acid test of seeing whether it actually works on a real live filter. So here goes nothing. There's only just enough space left on the pipe of this fuel filter to be able to clamp on there enough. But I think we should be alright. I think it should be enough so that I can actually get a flare on there. There we go. So I just got the end of it. I've taken the point off the flaring tool just so we don't wreck that. It's just sitting on the end of the shaft. When I did the last one, it didn't actually need very much at all to make it work. So here goes nothing. And that's just an M5 screw that I had lying around the place. Okay. Looks like it's done something. Pull it apart and take a look. If this works, this will be awesome. There we have it. I'm really happy with that. I was able to put the point back on there and just open the end up there. It wasn't bad at all. It's actually now a slightly bigger hole than what the other one is. But I think that's going to work really, really well. We'll do the others. Another part of the fuel system that required bubble flare and also a bit of a modification as well was the fuel rail. As it was in the Mazda, it had the inlet to the fuel rail poking pretty much directly up there, which looked like it was going to go pretty close to the underside of the hood. So I wondered how I was going to bend that down. I didn't really want to cut this piece here, and I was concerned that it might crack. But it actually worked really well. I just got a socket, put it in the vise, and a socket that went neatly over the top of this inlet here. Obviously I took the fuel rail out, and I was actually able to bend it around really nicely, enough so that now it's tucked down nicely in the valley there where it needs to. Similarly, the procedure for putting the bubble flare on the filter worked pretty well here as well. Not as well, but well enough that I was able to at least get some type of bubble on the end of the pipe here where the rubber hose goes over the top of it, just to retain the hose clamp and rub a little bit better. These clamps here, which I seem to remember hold the engine harness as it goes along the top here and runs down to the injectors and also over to the spark plug coils. I bent those up a little bit as well, thinking that it was going to give me more clearance. I think it might have, because it tucks it up inside the actual bonnet scoop here. We'll see how that goes, but they bent relatively easily and they would bend back quite well after. So another job done. So to fit the fuel tank, the first couple of times I've had this in and out, I struggled to get the fuel tank to stay in the right spot. So I went to the 3D printer and made up some guides, you can see here, one each side, that simply just pick up on the 25mm bar that goes out the back, and also fits down inside the slot. It's got two holes that pick up on where the holes are in the bottom plate, and it hooks onto the bottom of the fuel tank and helps locate it. So let's see how it goes going in. Similarly on the top, I have a couple of guides also 3D printed just out of ASA that help guide the top part of the fuel tank as well. There we go. Seems to have worked. These little guides on the top, they're pretty thin, but just also with the hook front and back. And I stuck some fuel hose. I just had fuel hose lying around the place, which was the right size to go on top of the threaded rods for the fuel tank, just to stop it from chafing against the fuel tank, but also it goes really close to the rear chassis member there. So just to provide some protection on that. So let's see how that goes. It's not too bad fitting the fuel tank. It's a little bit of a wrestle. These guides certainly helped things a fair bit. It was a bit of a struggle without it, but it all goes together. There's no doubt about that. Speaking of 3D printed parts, I thought I'd just grab a couple out of my bin for you and just run through what's available, what should be available on Thingiverse now for you to just download and print yourself. So starting over here, this was a bung I think for one of the coolant pipes. Some of these I printed just because it was far easier to print them rather than mask some of the stuff off. It was just much quicker. These were for the injectors. It was easy to pull the injector rail off with all the injectors in it and just drop these little bungs down into the injector port hole in the head. As you can see, they've already got paint on them. This one here was for the oil heater on the NC. It was just as easy to take the heater off the top with the bolt that goes down through it, drop this down, put the bolt straight down through the top, and that was all masked off nicely. This one here was for painting the oil heater itself. Mine was a bit ratty, but it cleaned up well. So that one went on the bottom and this one went on the top with that main bolt that goes down through the center. This one here was for the NC 5-speed gearbox. Somebody can possibly check if that's okay with print this out and stick it on an NB gearbox and let us all know whether it fits. But this is when you take the gear lever off, you can bolt this straight back down with the bolts that came out, and hopefully all the oil then won't fall out the top of your gearbox when you take the engine in and out. Obviously you still need the bung in the back of the gearbox where the tail shaft comes out, and I'll probably actually just 3D print up some type of bung that you can put in there as well. That seals that up, so that's handy. Here is just some versions, earlier versions of the ones I ended up completing and showing in the earlier video that sit underneath the fuel tank. So these ones sit underneath the base, two of those, and these ones go to the top. They're earlier versions, like I said. In actual fact, I ended up printing this in two halves just so it avoided all of the wastage, and that's just an easy then glue together. This one here was when I was going to use the ST150 manifold, which has the throttle body exiting on the rear of the engine rather than the front. That might still be an option for some of you. So this adapts the NCMX5 throttle body onto the Ford Focus ST150 manifold. Why that manifold is important is because it's the one that doesn't have the tumble flaps. Still has the variable length intake runners, but does not have the tumble flaps that everyone seems to hate. So that works, and it just fits the standard MX5 NC seal and the ST150 seal. They're slightly different seals. These ones down here, these aren't all my design. I did actually design a couple of them, but it was based on the design they were already found on Thingiverse that somebody else had kindly put up there. This is all based on exhaust pipe Lego, as I've been calling it. So there's various ones here. That's the bend radius I ended up using, which was about 1.5D. This is a slightly bigger bend radius, but you'll find those are available on Thingiverse as well. And the ones that I've designed I'll probably put up on my Thingiverse site. So once again, just go to www.thingiverse, thingy with an I in the middle of it, not a y.com. And then once you're there, just search on 7 wrangling, all one word, and you'll see these parts. They're organised in one way or another, and I'll add to them as I go. Hope they're useful to you. So in the rear, I chose to mount the fuel filter on the left-hand side rather than the right. The main reason is because with my application I needed to run the fuel lines down the left-hand side of the trans tunnel, because I'm using the Duratec/MZR Mazda engine, which is configured oppositely to the NB MX-5 engine in terms of intake and exhaust. It was just more convenient. So I've mounted it to the left-hand side and it fits fine there, no issues at all. And it also worked in relatively well with how I needed to run the lines around with regard to this carbon canister down here. Looking at it though, I'm keen in the future to come up with some usable boot space. And whilst it's, never going to be brilliant, I mean, you might fit 2 pairs of shoes in here, let's face it. But I think it could be useful because there's going to be more space in here than what there is inside the car itself, unless there's no passenger. What I think I might try and do in the future is see if this will actually fit somewhere else, possibly over here, or maybe tucked more down in the bottom there, just somewhere, because it does take up a fair old chunk of the less than ample boot space that may be available. Anyway, that's future Simon's problem to solve as well. So there's something in the back of my MK that's not normally there, and those eagle-eyed viewers will have spotted that this is that item. It's the carbon canister that came off the NC MX-5. It lives under the back of the car normally, in around the fuel tank, and what that does is collect fuel vapour from inside the fuel tank, stores it, and then it eventually gets burned inside the engine. So that's part of the emission system for that model Mazda, and it's common in pretty much all cars for a long time now. Because of the Australian design rule requirements that I need to comply with this car, I needed to lift all of the emissions systems that came with the donor engine and fit it to this car, and that is one of those things. There's not too many other things, and very few of them are sort of invasive, so I really don't have any issue with fitting them. The only minor concern there I discovered with this one once I fitted the handbrake cable was that it's a little bit tight down there for the handbrake cable, but there is a spot for it and it actually fits down through there quite well. So really no issues at all. What I will do eventually is up the top here where we've got the rollover valve that came with the MK kit, what I'll probably end up doing is fitting the system that came out of the Mazda fuel tank, which consists of 2 really smart rollover valves. The reason being is this only prevents fuel vapour from coming out, or fuel coming out in case there's a rollover. But it doesn't really allow for air to go back inside the tank in the case of it just expanding and contracting. Then that function may be served by the fuel cap. I haven't investigated that fully yet to see whether that happens, but the Mazda rollover valve system works really cleverly. It's buoyant. It also works with slight spring pressure either way, so it can control air going back into the tank to fill the tank back up, or to allow fuel to go out without collapsing the side of the tank, but also prevent fuel from leaking out if the car indeed rolls over. My current thinking is that I might get another little aluminium box to fit on top of here that connects up to the breather, put the rollover valves inside that came with the Mazda, and then make sure that that's sealed up properly so that they can fulfill their normal function. And I'll have a fuel tank that can breathe both in and out and through its carbon canister, and hopefully fool the ECU into thinking that it's still all sitting inside an MX-5. We'll see how that goes.
Super happy with the amount of space in there. I had expected that I was going to be bashing my left elbow on the handbrake all the time and potentially my right elbow on the side of it. But I think it's actually going to be really good. It felt pretty comfortable. Looking forward to getting in there for real. Fitting the tail shaft was one of those jobs that just went surprisingly easy with little fuss. I wasn't really that concerned that it was going to fit in the gearbox or fit between the diff flange, despite measuring it about 5 or 6 times just to make sure before I took the parts off to the fabricator. But one question I did have was whether there'd be enough room to easily insert it underneath. The calculations I'd done and some rough measuring said there shouldn't be a problem, but there was just that lingering thought that where I'd closed in the transmission tunnel underneath with the extra bracing, leaving only that rear portal open, that somehow I was going to be snookered fitting the tail shaft in. But anyway, it all just went really easily. It took about 15 minutes to fit and it was all done. So great to get that one ticked off the list.
Well, that sums up episode 5. Thanks for joining us. Tune in episode 6. We'll be looking much more deeply into the chassis testing process, setup of the test rig, and how that testing was performed. Catch you then. Bye.